screaming. So please proceed as normal. I apologize.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Al?
Not really. So
Okay.
you understand my underlying concern in asking the question is that I read
Yes.
through some of the documents, and when I see, oh, let's see, I'm scrambling through your package here, and when I start seeing people identifying 30-inch trees at breast height, I start getting concerned because this is going to cost somebody a lot of money. Now, if it's a large commercial enterprise or it's a major subdivision, then maybe that cost is warranted. But I'm very reluctant to impose this on small projects. Which is not to say that small projects can't have a significant impact on our forests. But I just want to be, I'm just leery of foisting a significant impact on, the guy who's coming in with a 2-lot subdivision.
I understand that. And these are the things that can be tweaked. Okay, 30-inch diameter. I mean, we're talking, this is just a general format, a loose package of information so that we could all get a feel for what's going on. But on the positive note, pointing out that a 30-inch diameter tree needing to be taken down for a 2-lot subdivision, prohibiting that or charging a fee to take that tree down could be prohibitive. Those are the things that we can work into this. I agree completely. We have to shape this around our community, and we have to encourage the continued development, but we need to encourage responsible development.
Okay.
So how do we shape this? This is what we need to know. You said small development. Your idea of a small development would be what? How much of a land footprint are we talking about?
Well, we already have like a template for this, right? We have minor subdivisions and we have major subdivisions and major land developments. So you could use those same categories if you were so inclined. Or you could certainly create your own. That might take a little doing. So the folks who are coming before us are using the categories that have already been established by the enabling legislation, minor, major, etc. So
correct.
My thinking would be you would use those same categories just for convenience.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so to answer your larger question, here's what I would benefit from. We're talking about, we're sucking stuff in from Maryland, and we got this idea and that idea. What I would really like to see is a specific layout of exactly how this would be implemented. So at some point we have to move from the conceptual to something that, okay, these are the mechanics of how this will work. And the sooner we make that jump, the easier it's going to be to bring this thing into focus. Now that's presuming that everyone is still on board with taking that next step. But from my position, that's what I would benefit from the most. Now that's going to take some serious effort because essentially that's drafting an ordinance.
Yep. We can do that.
I know we can do it. I just having written my fair share of them, I know what's involved. So the first order of business, just as we following the same line of thinking that we went through with regards to the revised solar ordinance that was put before us just last month, is
Yeah.
that the first order of business is to confirm that everyone is on board with this. And if that's the case, we take the next step. If anybody is opposed to this idea or has contrary thinking, let's not spin our wheels. So we need to hear from the other folks as well.
Okay, other folks. Are we the only ones here?
No, Ron and Emily are
Hi.
here because we haven't weighed in yet.
I was deferring to the hierarchy we normally adhere to, but I'll go.
Oh, Emily,
I'm supportive.
jump up the top chain.
I'm supportive of moving forward with this. I like the idea to use the structure that we already have for, specific criteria for minor subdivisions, major land development projects. I also agree with the idea that we would think about focusing on some of the major subdivisions or major land development projects and not the minor subdivisions. One of the things that came to mind as you guys were discussing is that Rhode Island DEM already requires landowners to get a cut permit if they're going to clear more than 5 acres of land. So it's not so simple for an individual homeowner to just clear cut their property. So there are already some checks in place that, maybe there's some coordination between DEM and the town that, we would be made aware if that was happening or something. I don't even know if we would be able to do anything about it. But just to mention that as sort of in the context of like, what if a homeowner wants to cut down a tree? They can, and that's their right to do on their land. It's just when it gets above the 5 acre threshold that they start having to notify or apply for permission to do so. I also like thinking about function and how these additional measures would be implemented, knowing that means writing an ordinance and the challenges that proposes. But we touched on something last month that I admittedly did not have time to do research on, but would still love to, and that's the concept of conservation design. Being new here, I don't know the entire history behind it, but I know that there are resources out there, and if we can pull in elements of that concept and that framework to help us move forward, I think that we should.
Mm-hmm. I personally was enjoying my reading time on the Rhode Island Wood with URI. There's a load of information, and it was my thought that I would want to pull them in at some point. Now, with Al pointing out that we are basically walking towards drafting an ordinance, I guess now would be the time to reach out to them for that kind of support, since they seem to be the pros here in Rhode Island, Okay. Thank you, Em.
Oh, okay. Now, what does everybody think of the idea of getting, now Carolyn mentioned contacting URI and using some of their expertise, for lack of a better term right at this moment. What about contacting some states other than along the eastern seaboard? Now, Maryland is a fairly affluent state, Rhode Island is. What about if we got input and ideas from, say, Montana or one of them other states? And weigh out all of our options, before we get headed down a path that we may end up regretting later. If we get a little bit more information, maybe it's going to help us out some.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Ron.
If
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Al.
So Ron, I hear that, and I'm certainly, I'm okay with exploring as much as we need to explore. Again, having been down this road once or twice, the further we stray from home, the more retooling we're gonna have to do. Montana is not Rhode Island. And I know you're not making that connection, but New England and the Mid-Atlantic, there's a certain mindset that we can easily graft behind. Once we leave home court, that mindset doesn't exist anymore. And I'm just concerned that when we start doing that kind of investigation, we're just going to find that, well, there's a whole different way of thinking, and it's probably not for us. So if you feel like looking at Montana, I say go for it.
Well, I just pulled Montana out of thin air. I mean, there are other states much closer to us that, you know, they might have a little bit of usable information for us, like Vermont or New Hampshire or something.
This is
Oh, yeah,
Talia.
they should most certainly be explored. I would agree with that.
This is Talia. Can I make a recommendation?
Yes, please.
So in all of the studying and that I've done over the course of my life, both in my undergraduate career and also in my graduate school career, the best way to compare ordinances or programs is to take two places that are similar. So instead of maybe focusing on places that are in New England or the Mid-Atlantic or on the West Coast or in the middle of the United States, I would recommend that if you were going to be looking at other places, you would want to find some place that is comparable to Hopkinton in regards to the amount of commercial development, the amount of residential development, the amount of industrial development, things of that nature, because you're going to want to find what people are doing in places like where we are, because that's going to be the most useful information. So that's just my 2 cents.
Yep. So Talia, again, Al Diorio, I get that. So are you suggesting that we look at communities that are like Hopkinton?
Yes.
Okay.
I just think that information would be the most applicable.
Got it.
This is Emily. I really like that idea. I had been poking around when we were discussing, or after we were discussing the solar ordinance, to learn a little bit more about how other towns are dealing with that. As we all know, Hopkinton isn't the only town dealing with large-scale solar developers wanting to buy up our relatively affordable land. And so there are lots of opportunities to learn from towns on how they're dealing with that. And there are towns that have this very similar structures and makeup as ours that are being sort of targeted in the same way by developers for the same reasons. One that comes to mind is, I think it's Dartmouth, Massachusetts. There might be sections of these towns that have a little bit more commercial development than Hopkinton does, of course. We're not going to find a perfect match, but it might be worth looking fairly close by at how some of these neighboring towns that are grappling with a lot of the challenges we're grappling with are addressing them.
Okay.
And I'd be willing to do some of that research. I'm not just, proposing that into the ether here. So happy to look up some of that stuff before our next meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Emily. That would be great. I did, just for reference, when, Talia was talking about weighing this against another similar community, I did find information last November from the Bureau of Land Management on the West Coast. And just the FYI, this was pertinent to large solar developments on the West Coast. And, we know what those look like. They're pretty big. But in any case, they were required to place, a developer would need to pay the Bureau of Land Management $10,000 per acre of land disturbance in a bond amount. And that is for not the decommissioning, but the returning the land back to its original state after the solar farm is dismantled and decommissioned. So there are huge differences in the way that we could read into this, and I agree that we need to stay closer to home. Maybe maybe Dartmouth is the place to go. I don't know. So, you know, it was mentioned a couple of times that we don't have a tree warden. I mean, of course, an ordinance would kind of speak to some of that, but one of the things that bothers me about what we're talking about over here is that we don't have any way to manage it other than going through the subdivisions and the planning board. We don't have administrative support for this, and I guess that would be something we could address at a later date. But that is in the back of my mind is, okay, so you know, you've got this plan, now what? So that's some of the information that I continue to look for, is like, how do you administer this just for the management purposes of it? And I've spoken about managing a decommissioning 25 years down the road. You know, it's costing the town money to execute these agreements today, monitor them for 25 years. At the end of the day, who is going to be handling that? And that also speaks to what we're talking about over here.
Yes, Carolyn, I have a thought there, Al Diorio. So,
yeah,
sure, I appreciate that, you know, most municipalities have larger staffs, and they can bring that staff to bear on monitoring all these wonderful ideas that we're going to put in place. I am not really sure that that's the answer for us, because that just speaks to increasing the expense for the taxpayer, right? As we bulk up our community, the taxpayer has to pay for all the staff. I would be thinking that an idea that we could consider, so, you know, here's the analogy. We have an on-call engineer. The engineer is paid for by the applicant. Why don't we have an on-call, I'm going to use your term, tree warden? And the tree warden position is paid for by the applicant on an as-needed basis. So if somebody has to monitor a plan, just like we went out for an RFQ on the town engineer, let's go out for an RFQ on whatever the person is that manages these or monitors these programs. That way it doesn't cost the taxpayer anything. We don't have to keep somebody in a room, whether they're being utilized or not, and it's at the applicant's expense, which, you listen, it's a user fee. If you want to play, you have to pay.
Okay. All right, that gives me some comfort.
Could I throw 2 cents in there?
Let's have some 2 cents.
Okay. How about going along with what you're saying, somebody that is a registered forester, people that we deal with and do it as a specific site, specific job number. For instance, Mr. Tremblay, not that we would, you know, I'm not promoting him, but somebody in his position, and we call him up and say, all right, we want you to take a look at this. Here's a day's pay to go do that or whatever. You know, instead of, like Al said, having somebody sit around and rest on their laurels until they're required.
Yeah, I think that's going to be an easier step. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think a licensed arborist or forester would be, the state law requires that we use licensed people, and I agree with Ron that that's the direction we would need to go in.
Okay, that was easy.
Yes.
So listen, just a couple of other thoughts from me. I would like to reach out to Scott Millar on this topic. I don't know how many of you know Scott. He's been very helpful for me with regards to the whole solar fandango, and he might have some insight as to direction in this regard. So I will shoulder that responsibility and reach out to Scott. The other
Great.
element that I wanted to touch upon while it's right here on top of my notes is Emily's comment about conservation design. I have two thoughts.
Yeah.
Number one, if my memory serves correct, the town of Charlestown is going through this investigation right now. So we could reach out to the planner in Charlestown to figure out what they're doing. I saw this advertised. It must have been part of the Planning Commission's agenda there recently. So that's a thought. Right along the same lines, we've already covered a lot of this ground. And Jim can jump in where my memory is faulty. But we already took a shot at this. It didn't go over well back then, but there's no reason why we can't resurrect that material and take another look at it. So, Jim,
That
am
would
I
be
remembering this correctly?
Yeah, Jim Lampier, town planner. I think that's a great idea, Al. You're 100% right. We did attempt to do that in this town when Ashley was here, the planner. I attempted to do it in Charlestown when I was the planner over there, and we both got dismissed from that effort. So, but again, times are different. Times have changed.
Yeah, that was a different time, right?
And I think that's a good way. Now again, when we were talking about conservation development, we were principally looking at residential subdivisions. And again, conservation development is all about developing with the land, okay, the contours, the trees, and flexible lot configurations and lot dimensions, so that you can preserve the qualities of the parcel. Now, applying this to commercial and industrial projects, we really didn't attempt to do that yet. But that's something that we can probably weave into it. I mean, I think that's a good way to, getting back into conservation development is a good way to achieve some of the goals that the planning board seems to want to put in place here. And I think it may have some legs now. We have a new town council, and I think it's worth another try. So that would be a
Jim,
place
do
to
you
start.
think it would-
Now, if I could just
Jim,
comment also, we're talking about ordinances here. A couple of ways to approach this is you can embed things in our subdivision regulations, or now keep in mind, an ordinance, when you actually talk about an ordinance, that is something that's going to have to be approved by the town council. So, and it go through the public hearing process, et cetera. So that's a little bit more involved than embedding or amending our subdivision regulations. So just give some thought to that. Now, another thing too is, in addition to looking at communities that are like Hopkinton, rather than creating an ordinance from scratch, which is a lot of work, you might want to look at some towns that already have done these things as a start, and then bring that right in, and then you can amend that to and tailor that to the Hopkinton's needs. And again, now as far as conservation development, we have probably got all this stuff in my office somewhere, if not on my computer, where we've made a start. So we don't have to start off from scratch with a lot of this stuff. So That's all I have to add.
That's kind of exciting, Jim. You've given us a jump start.
Yeah, well, I was kind of quiet because I wanted to hear what the board, I wanted to get a real good sense of what the board wanted to accomplish, where you wanted to go. And naturally, I have my experience behind me of 20 some odd years. And so I've been through, like Al, once or twice, I've been through these things. So I just wanted to see what my clients wanted here. And then I'm here to help you. I'm here to facilitate things for you, help you to the extent that, you know, whatever you want, we'll try and get in place.
Very
Okay.
good, Jim. Thank you. Hey, listen, a couple of follow-up thoughts there. Do you think that we could impose on you for the next go-round to take a look back at your conservation development materials and maybe send us all just a little something so we can, number one, become conversant in the theory? And I don't know if we got as far as a proposed ordinance, I don't know, something along those lines so that we can continue the discussion.
Excellent idea, Al. I will certainly do that. And that'll give us a really good point of departure here for discussion going forward. And
Yep. And
once
I
you
want
read
to,
it, yeah.
yep. And I want to, I realized that the last time we took a shot at this, it was focused on residential development. And that's okay, by the way, because I think that's in line with our objective. I know that Carolyn's focus has been on, you know, the larger projects, mostly commercial. But as I open some of the discussion, we can't negate the impact that residential development has on our resources as well. So let's do that. And the other thing I want to endorse is, and forgive me for not remembering this, the idea of utilizing the subdivision ordinance as opposed to creating an ordinance. I very much think we should move in that direction. It's going to be much easier to deal with if we work within our subdivision confines rather than start creating new ordinances.
And to validate that, the communities in Maryland that I was looking at do in fact have these things embedded under the subdivisions. So we're good there.
This is Emily. I have a couple questions. This is great discussion, by the way. When you guys say that you looked into conservation design at some point in the past and it didn't go over well, how long ago was it? And what were the reasons? Was it the planning board at the time wasn't really into the idea, or did you get public pushback? I'm just curious.
Jim Lanfear, town planner. My experience in Charlestown was the development community came out against it at a public hearing before the town council, and that kind of deep six the whole thing right there. All you need is a few key influential members of a community to come out and rally some troops and friends on the town council, and you know, you won't go anywhere if a town council doesn't want something. So that's where you win or lose the battle right there. But ironically, I worked with a developer, Commonwealth Engineers, and we did a wonderful subdivision in Charlestown off of Shannock Road, just off of Route 2, a short distance. And basically, I wanted to use that developer, and I asked him if we could employ conservation development principles to the extent that we could within our zoning ordinance as it stands, and within our subdivision regulations as it stands. And he agreed to do that. He said, yeah, he says, I like the concept. He says, and I'd be willing to do that on this particular subdivision. So that subdivision is in existence today. It was done, like I say, it was done to the extent that it could be done. And it came out very, very well. And actually this developer was the sole proponent. I asked him to come to the public hearing, and he spoke in favor of conservation development, but he was drowned out by some key influential developers in town who who ironically came in at the 11th hour, did not participate in any workshops, any public hearings, or anything to do with putting this thing together. But people came who were educated in about 30 minutes as to what this was and told what to say, and they said it, and then it ended it. So, I mean, a couple of years of good hard work went down the tubes really quickly because word got around. So that's how things happen. But again, something, don't let a couple of disappointments dissuade you. If you think the stars are in alignment and we have a new age right now and we have some momentum on our side, you know what? Bring it back and try it again. And maybe the time is right now. So.
Thanks, Jim. And throwing my 2 cents in from my recollection about what transpired here in town is that I believe the planning board was behind it. That was back when the state was pumped up on this idea. And again, there's a lot of merit to it. But one of the pivotal elements for conservation design is relatively small lots. To try and minimize the impact of construction and maximize open space and protection of the resources. Well, my recollection is the town council didn't really buy into that idea. Town councils here have never really endorsed smaller lots. And I think that was one of the stumbling blocks that we encountered when we investigated this last.
Jim Lampier, town planner, you're absolutely correct, Al. That's one of the major stumbling blocks for it. Matter of fact, some people refer to this as a super cluster because it really resembles a cluster subdivision. But some folks refer to it as a super cluster. And again, that I agree with you. That's exactly what happened here as well, is that people resented being clustered together. I mean, there's a strong sentiment in this town for large lot zoning. I want my home on my large lot, and I don't want open space around me. I don't want the public walking around my house in open space. And there's a lot to be said for that too, I guess. But we tried to make conservation development at the developer's option. All we wanted to do is give the developer an option to choose that if a given developer wanted to do it, not mandate it. So there's a big difference right there. So I think you have to kind of present it in that fashion.
This is Emily. That's really helpful context. I'm just curious. I don't want to be inflammatory here, but I'm curious, like for the Brushy Brook proposal that we're looking at. I mean, that is extraordinarily clustered housing development, and so I'm sure it's not conservation development. It's not adhering to conservation development practices, but do you think that maybe there are enough issues in town recently between these, large housing development proposals, the large solar development, that sentiment might be different? And maybe this is the topic of a public forum of a workshop or something to hear what people think about this. But we've heard a lot of commentary from the public over the last several months about this type of development in town. And I'm just curious where people's threshold lies with, balancing different development practices and taking the risk that every once in a while you might get something like a Brushy Brook proposal that a lot of people seem to not really see as desirable in our town.
Jim Lampier, town planner. I just want to mention, as you know, Emily, that came to the town as a comprehensive permit, which allows you to basically take the zoning ordinance or any other development regulations we have and throw them right out the window and ask for any waivers. You ask for anything at all, increased density. So I think you have to take a look first at exactly how does a specific project come before the planning board or the town to begin with. And then once we realize how that's being presented to the town, then we can decide how we deal with it in that particular, method. Comprehensive permits are quite different from a major subdivision. Not to say that a comprehensive permit couldn't be done as a conservation development. That might give you an opportunity to do something like that. So, there's always opportunities to be creative on these things. So it's good thought. Good thought you have.
My last
I
question
think,
was, oops, sorry, Carolyn. One more
Go
quick
ahead,
one.
no, take your time.
What is the process to amend the subdivision regulations? Like, how do you actually do that?
You'd have to, well, the planning board would have to get together, have a workshop, talk about the specific amendments. And then there's a process to amend them, state process, public hearing, et cetera. So can be done. Now, you have to take a look at the specific amendments that you're proposing. If they are also part of an ordinance somewhere in town, you may have to go before the town council and amend the ordinance first before you follow suit on the subdivision regulations. But if it's not really embedded in an ordinance somewhere, if it's entirely within the subdivision regulations, then you can do that basically on your own. But you do have to advertise it. There is a formal process that the state lays out to amend the subregs. So, but we don't need town council approval for it if it's not an ordinance.
Gotcha, thank you.
Okay, if I could just draw your attention to the time. We're coming up upon our timeline for the conclusion of our workshop. So can we just spend a couple of minutes and focus on where we're going to go next?
Jim Lampier, town planner. Al, I will attempt to round up some really good conservation development material for the board's packet next month. And then we can take a look at that and decide where we want to go from there.
Okay, that's very good. I appreciate that. Jim, I see that as a kind of like a corollary, running down the same track idea as what Carolyn is proposing.
Yeah, I think it's very closely related. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I don't want that to take over what's being proposed here.
Okay, so I guess my question would be, so what's being proposed that this would be taking over? I don't know what we came out with.
No. I'm suggesting that we have this. Let's call it the forestation package.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and then we have this thing over on the side, conservation development. They're running down parallel tracks, but I don't want them to necessarily become the same thing, right? Because they're not. I don't think that is Carolyn's objective here.
Oh, well,
Carolyn, speak right up.
Hello.
Yes.
I'm very curious to see the work that was done in the conservation development. And what I'd like to see is if there's work that's already been accomplished and completed, if we could incorporate it into the objective of having a forestation agreement at the end of the day. That's
So
what I'm hoping for.
Okay, so would you be amenable to leaving this such that we're going to review conservation development at our next gathering and see how or if the forestation thing can fit inside it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, if we can do bigger work with less effort, I'm all for it.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're not diluting your efforts.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
And this is, we're moving away from concept development, and we're talking about the actual implementation of ideas that have been executed elsewhere. I'm excited to know that we actually have previous work that you guys had done right here in our community, let alone other communities to rely on. We need to, as a community, handle the forestation part of our relationships with these developers better than we have. And I guess the state of Rhode Island knows that this is the direction they need to go in. Different communities are now offering carbon credits to retain private forests and things like that. If we could get something started here sooner than later, I'd be happy. And the fact that there's this pre-existing work that you guys have already hammered out is a huge step in the right direction. So Jim is committing to doing, bringing forward that conservation development work. And Al, you said you were going to reach out to Scott Millar for us.
It's already been done.
It's already been done. Okay. I'm going to reach out to URI and see if we can get some insight and maybe participation from them as well. And Scott Millar is familiar with these documents that I've been presenting to you. The one that I had mentioned at another meeting, the value of our forests, he was a contributor there, so he's like the perfect person to bring in.
Excellent. Okay, is there anything else we need to discuss on this topic before we adjourn the workshop?
One question. This would be probably to Jim. He's the most familiar with all of these things. Would it be beneficial to reach out to, say, Burrowville or Exeter, our next door neighbor, and see what they have for thoughts on these different things? What they've done, what they're thinking, or whatever.
Yes, Jim Lanfear, town planner. It's a good idea, Ron. We should look and see what communities have done this already. I believe South Kingstown has adopted conservation development to at least some degree. So we can take a look at South Kingstown, see how far they've come, and I'll look at other towns as well and see who has it in place.
Okay, I was thinking, like what I mentioned, Burrowville and Exeter, because they're more in line with Hopkinton as far as the way the whole town is configured, than South Kingston, which is more densely packed. It's more, I don't want to use the word urban. It's just, I'm getting off course here.
I'll
Okay,
check them out,
thanks, Jim.
Ron. Yeah, I'll look around.
Okay, very good. So our time is just about over. Can we consider the workshop adjourned?
Yes.
Do I need a motion on this, or because it's a work? Yeah, let's do it. Anybody care to make a motion to adjourn the workshop?
I make a motion, we adjourn the workshop
I have a
and set a
motion. Do I
date
have
for another
second?
one.
Oh, yes, okay, thank you very much. Shall we consider continuing our 6 o'clock adventures together?
Yes.
Works for me.
Okay,
6 o'clock works for me.
there it is. So I had a motion, do I have a second?
This is Carolyn, I'll second.
I have a motion, I have a second, any further discussion? All in favor? Diorio, yes?
Prelwitz, yes.
Light, yes.
Shamshina, yes.
Keith is here. Yes. Sorry, I'm late.
Welcome aboard, Keith. Thank you. Okay, very good. That concludes our workshop session. Thank you. Break before we go at 7-ish.